to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm excited to be speaking to two guests today. I think it's the first time I've had a husband and wife team on the show. However, I must say each person is individually specifically interesting in their own merit, and we're going to talk about each other's independent work. We're also going to talk about books that they have co-authored, talking about the Anunnaki today. We've touched on this a few times on the show. Super interesting. Let me just tell you about Dr. Sasha Lessin before I bring him on. Dr. Sasha Lessin, PhD, author of The Anunnaki, Gods No More, and producer of the highly popular website EnkiSpeaks.com. He studied with the late Zachariah Sitchin for many years, and Sitchin asked Dr. Lessin to create popular courses to revise ancient anthropology and add the aliens and the Anunnaki on Earth from 450,000 BC to 300 BCE. To appreciate ethnology, Lessin's speciality in anthropology, he invites you to empathetically review stories of our ancestors recorded and recited of extraterrestrial gods. Let me tell you a little bit about Janet Lessin. Janet Kira Lessin is a lifelong scholar and experiencer of extraterrestrial and interdimensional contacts. She's a student of Sitchin also. She immersed herself in studies of Ninmah, the Anunnaki, and receives direct downloads from Ninmah, the geneticist from whose womb we all received our mitochondrial DNA. Janet expresses Ninmah consciousness, peace, longevity, respect for consciousness, justice for women on Earth, and membership in galactic society. She's also co-authored Anunnaki, Legacy of the Gods with her husband, Dr. Sasha Lessin. Wow, and if that wasn't an entrance enough, we also have they have a radio show, Aquarian Radio. So without further ado, welcome to Capricorn Radio, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us on your show. We're very blessed that you've invited us to be here today.
Wow, it's, you know, I love what you guys do. You put so much time into your websites, your radio shows, your books, and, you know, publicizing yourself is a full-time job, as an author. And I see a lot of authors out there, you know, they just publish the book and they leave it go and they hope for the best. But you guys, you know, you have a good dynamic, and I see a lot of effort go in. I know this from myself, and, you know, fascinating subject as well, guys. We're going to get into that. I guess, Dr. Lessin, if you could tell us a little bit about you, the anthropologists, the education background, that respect, and then how you fell in with Sitchin as well.
Okay. I'm from UCLA, and I have a PhD in anthropology from UCLA. And at the time I was going to UCLA, the anthropologists were forcing everything into an evolutionary perspective, and so that all of the sudden achievements of Sumerian civilization and so forth, the professors were constrained to make it sound as though they evolved. And the same too with physically. They were using this model that we had to come from a simple primate and evolved. And of course that model has, American Indians were supposedly came across the Bering Strait when the sea wasn't so high, and that they finally worked their way all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in South America. And it was just a bunch of nonsense, because the evidence that we now have is that Earth was seeded by terraformers, that we did not evolve from simpler creatures at all, but that we were deliberately engineered from the genome of full intellectual human beings, the Homo sapiens from the planet Nibiru, and they dictated records to the adapted species, the slave species, that's us, about how they came here and how they used some genes from Homo Erectus, which was one of these intelligent hominoids that had been placed here. That's the ancestor of modern Bigfoot that's still around. And when we started looking at all the supposed species that evolved in the Cretaceous and so forth, we found that no, they were all there, and nothing ever evolved to another genus. Yeah, there's ratiation and microevolution is indeed true, but macroevolution isn't. And as far as the great movements of civilization, we find that indeed, when the Anunnaki, after the Great Flood, decided they were going to make us more self-governing, they were here in order to get gold, and we were created to mine gold for them. And they deliberately introduced metallurgy and kilns and those kinds of, and their form of government and debt and deliberately, made us, pitted against each other so we could never realize there's only about 1,000 of them and there was hundreds of thousands of us. And they had detailed records of how they took, people across both the Pacific and Atlantic. They had a huge, spaceport by Tiwanaku on top of the Andes, by Lake Titicaca, and they were all over the globe. They had a global network with landing fields and their structures. They had pyramids, which were their powerhouses, and they had orientations with the stones, like Stonehenge and other similar structures, Göbekli Tepe and others, which basically let them know calendars and computers where they could actually see how we aligned as the precession of equinoxes shifted Earth about, so that they could always navigate back and forth. And on this globe, they had spacecraft, they had shuttles, they had a geocentric system, and they had a base on Mars. And basically, all the old anthropology and people that were stuck in academia were, you lose your job if you say, well, my mentor, who's made his career on, evolution, is wrong. Fortunately, I guess my mentors aren't around anymore. They're older guys. But in any case, I started studying with, Zechariah Sitchin and looking at all these old Sumerian, materials, and the evidence is overwhelming, not only of the Anunnaki, but of other, that we've been visited by extraterrestrials from time immemorial and way before the Anunnaki came, which was only 450,000 years ago.
Wow. Wow, Dr. Lessin, awesome. You're so passionate when you speak. You know, I actually just twigged a memory there. I think the first book I ever read in alternative history, if you want to call it that, was Gods of the New Millennium by Alan Alford, and in it he cited a lot of Sitchin's work. Yeah, I think he heavily cited Sitchin, and at that point I realized I just had to go and read Sitchin's work because there seemed to be too many references, and why not go to the source? And when I read the Earth Chronicles, I was like gobsmacked. I was like, wow, why don't we get this in the history books? Why don't we get this in school? And, how was it for Sitchin in his day when he was, he was a veteran of this subject matter. He really spent his life and devoted it. A lot of man hours. What was it like for him to try and just keep sludging away and getting this information out there and keep researching and writing?
Well, he after a while became annoyed with doubters and people that would attack him, and he reached the point where he said, I'm not going to appear on the stage with anybody else. I don't want to be in a big argument. I want to present my evidence. And he presented it in huge detail. And we went to all these seminars where we actually we take things apart sentence by sentence by sentence. He was infinitely patient. And in his very last book, he had a heart attack before he did it. He prayed that he could live long enough to finish his last book. And in that last book, The King Who Wouldn't Die, he actually goes into some of the explicit sexual practices of Inanna and Gilgamesh and things that he'd been holding back. And he just let it all hang out in that last book.
Wow. I think he realized the importance of it. He lived to a ripe age as well, Dr. Lessin.
He was 90 years old, and it wasn't a heart attack. He had open heart surgery. And I think he got 2 more books out after that, but he sat on the edge of his bed. He told us this at the conference in 2005 in Florida. Fort Lauderdale, I think it was. And he sat on the edge of the bed and he prayed. And he said, I prayed to Enki. And I said, if you help me get through this surgery, I will do another book for you. So, after that, when we had seen him before that, open heart surgery, but afterwards, his heart was literally open. There was a huge change in him. He was more egocentric before the surgery, and he was heart-centered afterwards. And somebody asked him a question and noticed it, and he says, yes, think about it. I was cut open like a fish. I was filleted wide open right down the center, and my heart chakra is now fully opened. So I think he really enjoyed, the last parts of his life.
Wow.
And it was very sad how he died because we didn't even know he was dead for about 2 weeks. Wow. And they had him in a home somewhere. There's a whole story behind that. But
his biggest, what he wanted, for his legacy was to finance the, examination of, Puabi, the last, part Anunnaki ruler who was, buried, and in Uruk. And, that's, I think, is going to go through. And this, we'll see. This princess, she's underneath, her corpse is in the British Museum underneath. That will actually show us just what the difference between the Anunnaki genome and ours is.
Wow.
Right. Some kind of controversy had put aside a couple $1 million or whatever so that this project could go forward because he wanted to prove that she was, Anunnaki ancestry. So
sure.
That is, I think, in progress now. I don't really know.
Sure. Yeah, I go to the British Museum at least once a month, if not twice a month. I'm flying to London regularly, and the people have no idea that they have at least 3 times the quantity in the underground basements and in the warehouses than what's above ground. And John, let's get into a little bit about your background, and just to do it justice. Can we talk about your experiences with contact and how far back it goes, Janet?
Well, basically, I came into the physical form, and something about the veil did not really shut down, and I had memory of past lives, and I could see ghosts. I call them ghosts when I was a child because there was no reference to extraterrestrials. Mm-hmm. We're talking about 1954. But they were probably extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, and discarnate beings. And they could see me seeing them. So my childhood was very rich with all these extraterrestrial beings. It upset my mother horribly, so I had to adapt to her reaction. She didn't want to hear about it, and so I had to kind of shut that part down. But from the beginning, I've had contact, and I was able to astrally project and astral travel. So the most poignant episode was when I was about 18 months old. You know, when you're a child, you don't think in terms of I'm 18 months old, right? But I'm sure. Guessing based on it was winter and it was cold. I don't know, just thousands of beings came around me. And you have to realize when you're dealing with extraterrestrials, we're outside of 3D reality. So you can see 360 when you're looking at these beings and you're in your altered state or your extraterrestrial eternal self. Your vision is not limited to 2 eyes at the front of your head. So I was able to see these beings all around me 360, and they were coming in and looking me in the eyes one after the other, and I don't know how long they went on until finally the last one looked me in the eyes, and everybody had tears, and a loud clap came. And then I had to anchor it into being human because I had a mother that was very reactive to what was going on with me as a baby because I was able to talk as an adult, and she caught me when I was flying around the room. I know this sounds really, really bizarre, but I've done hundreds of hours of hypnosis to recover what exactly happened because I think what is true for me is not only true for me but true for many of us, and we are repressing our natural abilities, which are much like what the Anunnaki had. Think about it. We have 256, DNA strands that have been turned off. Mm. So I was sent here, and I went into my human incarnation, and I had to live with a mother that was very reactive, and deal with the extraterrestrial presence. I became a researcher. Basically at 9 years old, I started studying Velikovsky, and von Daniken came around in the late 60s. And then, of course, Star Trek happened in 1966. We're approaching the 60th anniversary. And Gene Roddenberry was an emissary bringing the truth to us so we would awaken and become conscious. And he did a good job. So I became very involved with anything involving science fiction and extraterrestrials because, you know, for me, that is where it's like I was future pacing. That's where we were going, and I was here to lead the way. When I was 4 years old, I was outside, in the yard playing, and it was very safe back in the days in the 50s. You could go outside, your mother didn't have to watch you. And I was picking buttercups, and I had them all in a row, and I made them all even, and I had them in my hand. I was going to take it back to my mother, and I was stepping over a little tiny, fence. And as mid-step, suddenly I was up on board a mothership. And they created what I've learned by working with experiencers is often they create scenarios which are comfortable for the person, so they have a reference point for the experience. So they created a theater for me. And I came and sat into the front row center of this huge theater, and there was a large concave screen in front of me, and they started showing me scenes, 24 different scenes of the potential future histories of the Earth. What could happen? These were multiverses, potential realities. And they started out with a side view of the planet Earth, and a beam came from 3 directions and destroyed the Earth, and it was stardust. And then they faded, and there was another scene, and the Earth was intact, but there was a lot of destruction. And they kept fading and showing me different scenes, 24 different scenes, the worst being total destruction, all the way to utopian realities where everything was incredibly gorgeous. And once again, you're in the other type of communication. People think of telepathic communication as having to be language, but it's concepts. You get entire downloads and concepts way beyond the human mind. And so while I was visually seeing things, I was getting conceptually everything that was happening on the planet in terms of destruction and what species and what parts of the planet survived. And at the end of these 24 different future histories, they said, which multiverse do you choose? And I chose one of the utopian ones. And upon choosing, I was returned to Earth, where I was continuing stepping over this little fence. And then there was a final kind of goodbye, and they left. And then I realized they said I had come here to do something very important, and that when the time was right, it would be okay for me to come out. And so now the time is right, and I am coming out. And I'm working with all these other experiencers. I knew not to go in and talk to my parents and my sister and brother because they couldn't handle it. But I did confess to my brother years later. He was the most open-minded of the whole family. Sure. And he's the one who helped me become a researcher. So he was 7 years older than me. So he would get these books that were kind of above my normal years, but he and I would read and talk about it. So I really owe a lot to my brother who helped me. And he introduced me to Sitchin.
At what point, that was my next question, John. At what point did you find Sitchin's work then?
I'm working to piece that together. It was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, because I already had been studying von Daniken and Velikovsky. Now, we lived in Pennsylvania, so we didn't know, it wasn't a New Age community, so books would kind of filter to us. Back in those days, when you went to the bookstore, there was only a teeny tiny section on UFOs, right? And the paranormal. So anything that we could get our hands on, my brother and I read. So Sitchin, I realized was, it. You know, it tied in with, von Daniken, but von Daniken only went so far, and Sitchin took it the next level. And, so things had come full circle. So I started doing a UFO discussion group at Penn State University when I lived there and worked at the university, and we had between 30 to 50 students. We met once a week, and we just we played whatever we'd get VHS videos of whatever television show. We would have a discussion. So it was hot. And then we had Linda Moulton Howe come, and she was still pretty new back then. This is 89 or 90. So that's kind of, then I met Dr. Lessin in 97. Sure. I had been researching this all my life. So, we're talking about starting in the 50s, and here it was 97. I didn't know where he stood on the matter. So I put the book, The Gods of Eve, on the back of the toilet for him to hopefully read. And one day he came out and said, "Oh my God, is there more?" And so we went and bought all of Sitchin's books. And then right about that same time, his friends who ran the Prophets Conference said, "Would you like to come? We have this guy, Zecharia Sitchin." And it was just beyond synchronicity. It's like, yes. So then we started traveling with Sitchin and going to the certification programs. And, we're going on 18 years together. We have been obsessed with the research.
I think that's the sign of a good researcher, though, Janet. That's definitely the sign of a good researcher. In anthropological sense, then, Dr. Lessin, where is the legacy of Sitchin today? Are we further along in terms of DNA studies, genetics, Neanderthal stuff like that?
Yeah, we are largely to Lloyd Pye has a seminal work showing that basically microevolution is valid, but macroevolution is invalid, and does not at all show what has really come down. And also, the earlier work shows that there's been many extraterrestrials, the coneheads, or Capensis, and small grays, and so forth, who have visited throughout time. Sitchin put his main attention on the Anunnaki, who only came here 450,000 years ago, but Michael Cremo has documented skeletons of huge human beings from way, way earlier, 60 million, even one at 600 million years ago. And so that we know that Earth has been visited continuously, and unlike Van Daniken, we find that the Anunnaki and their spawn didn't go back, that they are still the ones in charge of the power elite or planetary oligarchy that run this planet to this day, and run it down, I might say.
In terms of either theism or evolutionary biologists, the script that they give us just doesn't work. And I always say to the naysayers anyway, Dr. Lessin and Janet, that, there isn't anything else that fits. This Anunnaki model, of genetic manipulation, fits perfectly. And there is no corresponding theory to put itself in the running.
To look at how this came about is that the evolutionists were reacting against the creationists, the Bible thumpers, so much that anything that sounded like intervention, and of course they couldn't conceive in the 50s and so forth of off-world or influences, anything that smacked of creationism was rejected. It had to be evolutionism. And so what Pye has shown us is what we really have is, he calls it interventionism, where we have seen that the Earth was systematically seeded with the organisms that would provide the basis for the next seeding and the next seeding and the next seeding, and so it goes.
Wow.
And having been raised Christian, Sitchin's work was a logical explanation for the biblical stories, which is what we're finding with our research. So.
Sure. Yeah, sad to see Lloyd go. What a loss for the alternative research. I think it was probably a few days before he was diagnosed. I had him on the show, and then I had him on for the intervention theory book that he wrote. And, what a researcher. He really did, pursue this thing with passion. And like you say, you have to just throw yourself into the research. And we've got great researchers. You've got Gerald Clark, Lloyd Pye, Michael Tellinger. And I know you've interviewed a lot of these, Janet. I mean,
yes.
Do you think this is what we need now? We need people to pioneer certain strains of research. Is that what we need nowadays?
Well, I think we just need to keep talking about it, because the more we talk about it, the more we start coming up with answers. What I've started to do are these discussion panels, and I get 3, 4, maybe 5 experts in the field. Up until now, we've been kind of divisive and coming from ego, and it's like, I can't share my secrets because I need to sell my books. But money's not it, and we've got to do more, because we're, we include the conspiracy information in our research, because you have to look at everything. I'm not saying I agree with everybody, but I've got to look at it to see what's really going on. And if you follow the thread of all these different researchers, what doesn't fit will not fit, and it'll be thrown out. It'll be tossed out. It's like a group gestalt. So when we have the various researchers coming together and we're just talking about the issues, then many of the researchers get the huge ahas. They go, I never thought about that. I didn't have that piece of information. And so that's what we're doing. We're just like you. We're interviewing everybody, but the next step is the panels and us coming together and putting aside, our differences. Okay, we can talk about it. We can even very politely say, I differ with you on this conclusion, and just put it out there. And it's taking us to another level. And I'm not exactly sure exactly how it's doing it, but it is a process that is.
Well, reality is an elephant. We all grasp a different organ of the creature that reality is. And so, whether it's like a snake or a tree or something else, depends on our perspective. And I think that almost every perspective has something to add.
For sure. You know, I just come back, as you guys know, I just came back from the Hidden History Conference in Bosnia with Michael Tallinger, and I sat through the 4 hours of a presentation, which he said he cut down. he reduced to 4 hours, something like that. And people can catch that in the archives, but I'm absolutely godsmacked, you know, at the amount of evidence that the guy has put together. I mean, Michael has done a great service to research, and he really is like a lone voice down there. He's screaming out, going, you know, look at all these structures and the quantity, you know, their function. You know, this is crazy that there is, what I'm trying to allude to is there is evidence on this planet. It's wide, it's varied, it needs to be categorized and researched from different fields. I mean, Sitchin really did leave a legacy, didn't he? And people have carried the can and really continued.
Yeah, I agree that Michael really has, Tellinger has really moved it along. And what he's actually done is he's shown how sonar technology, is available to us using the energy of the earth and facilitating it. Christopher Dunn has shown how you get a stagnant pool, say underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza or Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and then you pump it under pressure, and it starts this wave going upwards, which then you have a combination of hydrated zinc and HCl that come together, and they make a hydrogen explosion, and then using inverse kind of it's using the crystals, inverse Piazzoli or something like that, it's called, where basically you facilitate it, get it up going higher and higher in a toroid. And they had these waves of energy they could pick up with their stations. They could broadcast to monoliths all over. The lights of Luxor were lit. They had advanced technology, and they knew how to move stones. They also had something like our modern Brown's gas, where you could make a chemical stone, not just an aggregate cement, but there's actual a chemical binding. So you have a whole mile-long sandstone piece that they made it soft, and then it became hard and glazed all around Angkor Wat. And they also could move these gigantic stones using sound. And this is in our scientific literature and the advanced literature, they actually know the mechanisms. And you can go to almost any of our conferences and you can see people demonstrating how they move objects using sound.
Sure. Well, what a great point to bring in the science of the Anunnaki, because these guys were scientists more than we could even dream of today of our own abilities. You know, even if we just in our wildest dreams thought up some technology, these guys had it. I mean, these guys were extremely advanced geneticists and extremely advanced scientists with all sorts of radical technologies.
Well, one of the worst things, though, is they had advanced weapons. They nuked each other at one time when one faction, the Marduk faction, was closing in on the spaceport on the Sinai. They had taken a lot of the cities in Canaan, especially the cities on the south side of the it was called the Salt Sea then, and they nuked them. That's what made the Salt Sea the Dead Sea. But the fallout from this nuking then blew over all of Iraq, Sumer, and wiped out their whole society. Plus, we have from Harappa in the Indus, tephra, the result of a nuclear explosion. And Lot's wife wasn't turned to salt; she was turned to vapor, just like those poor old ladies in Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
No, but they probably had Stargate technology and teleportation, and Andrew Basiago has been on a modern day version of these different technologies, and so they were able to time travel. So these are the things that are being repressed and hidden by the world governments, and that's one of the main reasons they went into Iraq is because of the Stargate technology.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, guys, look, we're getting into some Anunnaki stuff and technology stuff here. Let's mention the books, Anunnaki Gods No More and Anunnaki Legacy of the Gods. Tell us the premise for each book and why one's slightly different than the other.
Okay, well, the first one is which I'm currently revising because I've got so much more information. But the first one is a comprehensive study of what was happening on the planet Nibiru, where they had their military dictatorship, and how this the fight over who was going to be the ruler took place, and then their atmosphere was blown apart, by their travels through space, and so they needed gold, and they wound up coming to Earth to get the gold. And so it goes from there right on down to 311, when Thoth, one of the sons of their great scientist Enki, he was known in the New World as Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl, left in 311 BC and said, "I'll be back on December 21st, 2012, and I'm bringing 9 gods and 12 other gods," by that he means Anunnaki, "with me, and we're going to straighten out the mess that our hybrids have, and those of us who stayed back have left on this planet." And it's up for grabs whether it's really happening, whether things have changed since then. But that's what Thoth said as he left.
I gotta mention Nibiru from an astronomy background and in my vocation, but nothing serious. But I'm always obsessed to find out if we can find Nibiru, do we know when its return is? Is there a window that we know it's going to come back? Can we say there's a definite period? Are we going to be waiting for a while? A lot of people are speculating it's not going to be here for 1600 years, and people are saying it's coming and it's in our skies, we just can't see it. Do we know about its infrared? Is it going to be visible? Astronomically, in a practical sense, do we know, its whereabouts?
Well, Andy Lloyd has pointed out that he thinks it's way out in Delphinius, near Sagittarius right now. And what we're passing through is the 180 degree Lagrange point. That is the detritus that stays in the path, the orbital path of Nibiru. This is detritus left from the collision of Nibiru and one of its moons, the evil wind that struck Tiamat, which was the proto-Earth, and knocked it from its orbit between Mars and Jupiter to its present, and the big part became Earth, between Venus and Mars, of course. And that the great big place where it got hit was a Pacific basin, which lacks any kind of a mantle of any length. It's only 12 miles deep, whereas the mantle on the rest of the Earth is 65 miles deep, and it's only sediment and volcanics that have given it any mantle at all. So that it's periodically not just Nibiru that comes through, but also this stuff, also at the 90 degree, and right now the 180 degree Lagrange points. Now there's a lot of argument among professionals about just what's coming through, but something's coming through, and we have pictures of all kinds of huge craft around the sun right now, and we can see them zapping pieces of debris or something large that keeps coming in. There are craft up there that are protecting us, and we have lots of documentations of Valiant Thor and other extraterrestrials that have been protecting the Earth.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we have other researchers in our team. We have Don Hall, who's taking all the
Evans.
Don Hall's doing the infrared photos, and every day she posts them on Facebook. Robert Evans has been gathering what's going on with the SOHO. You have all these different pictures out there and YouTube's about the second sun or the dark star or whatever's happening here. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the Exodus with Moses, whoever he was, and it kind of ties in with now. Nibiru will return. I know Sitchin, you couldn't get him to really say. We all kept asking, when's it coming? And I think he was saying it was going to be around 2100 or.
Well, he said that when it passed through, the last time it sped up, it interacted with Uranus, tilted Uranus on its side, and then it sped up to 3,400, years. 460 years instead of 3,600 years. And so he kept giving different dates about when Nibiru is through. One of the most interesting things is A.R. Borden, who belonged to a committee that met regularly with the extraterrestrials concerned with Earth, he says in his book, The Link, and that they actually were able to, Borden says, move us out of a timeline until we were past the great danger. So we don't know whether Nibiru is going to come through and wreak havoc or not, but have as much fun as you can while you can.
It may be passed already. We're tracking down these sources. A.R. Borden is a very interesting source. Unfortunately, he died, I think, January of 2013, but we got one of the meeting notes. Apparently there's a very top secret group that meets, and it's both extraterrestrial and human, and They meet, looks like it's January of every year, so they probably have a meeting coming up. But they're positive extraterrestrials that are here to assist us. And Michael Hill, who's a researcher, lives in Erie, Pennsylvania, says that he was at a kind of like an outdoor festival in the summer a couple of years back, and he was taken to meet Marduk. And he describes that in detail of how he met with Marduk, and then he discovered he had a blood anomaly, which is very, very rare, which links him to being the Nephilim, I guess is the next generation down, the hybrid human Anunnaki, where he has a different blood type. We're researching it all. I'm looking at all the information. I'm going, I don't know, but I think it might be A.R. Bordenstein, because if you look at the Exodus, it would have been here by now, and we would have had a major catastrophe.
One of the things to know about the Anunnaki and the other extraterrestrials is that we are not just some dumb savages that were only to be slaves, although that's what the commander, Enlil, or Yahweh, wanted us to be. What Ningishita, who found the X and XY chromosomes and the ability to procreate and the clones that they were making, and Nimma, the mother of humanity, and Enki, the great scientist, did, is they didn't like the dictatorship and the emotional immaturity of these big babies with weapons that were running things, and they designed us so that we would do better than them. And when little Tiamat was brought to Eden, Basara, where Enki lived, and she had been made fertile, and she got together with Adamu, and she was pregnant, and her consciousness changed at that time. She became conscious, and she made a little apron for herself, and she made a table. And when their neighbor, Commander Enlil, came over, and he saw that she was pregnant, before he could say anything, she said, "Hi, I'm Tiamat. Look what I made. I made this little table. Who are you?" And of course, Enki, or Yahweh, was really annoyed, and he had Enki tied up and so forth. The council, of course, freed him and so forth. But he was aghast that what was going on for the commander is that Enki's son Marduk had been promised to be the king of Nibiru as a result of a dynastic marriage between the guy that overthrew their old king, Lama, and his name was Alalu, and kicked Anu out of the succession. But instead of Anu revolting, they made a deal. Anu's son, Enki, would marry Alalu's daughter, Damkina, and their kid, who turned out to be Marduk, would then be the next king. Well, Anu overthrew Alalu, and he didn't want Marduk to return with all the earthlings. He was scared to death the earthlings would take back the throne that Marduk really felt was his. And so this is huge dynastic thing that's being played out with armies of us, human, regular earthlings, and being massacred for these guys in their wars.
We're the pawns in their chess game.
For sure.
But I wanted to say one thing. In 1996, I was on Johnston Atoll, which is a military base. I was a civilian working for the military. And I was taken to an underground installation. 6 Greys came and carried me. They took me to a shuttlecraft along with a young man that I had taken on as a lover at that time. And we went out into the ocean to underwater. And there was a man-made installation which fed into a natural cave system. And the young man, they kept him. They did the traditional, abduction stuff. They put him on the table, and they had the Greys around him. But they took me over, and it was very strange. I was given a gown to wear, and I started to walk down into the facility, going obviously down deeper, and so they started to come in behind me, these tall whites. I knew they were Anunnaki. They were everywhere from about 6 foot was the shortest, and the tallest was probably 14 feet. They were all dressed like medieval, going to a ball in King Henry VIII's time. And they kept falling in behind me as I was walking down. And eventually I got to a place with a obsidian wall, huge wall of obsidian, and I stood before it, and everybody stopped talking. There was a lot of, it wasn't any, verbal talking. It was all telepathic communication. So it went dead silence. And, then the wall came down as I stood into this, circle of light, which came from above and made a perfect circle on the floor. And it revealed this, giant, dragon. Wow. And so then there was this communication going once that she was revealed. And, then they returned me back to my bunk. The Greys were the worker bees. They returned me back to my bed. And, I was left with this great mystery of what was going on there. Mm-hmm. But, Ender's Game, the movie that came out a couple years ago, it's the same thing of Ender's. I think that, what was his name? Scott, Card.
Yeah.
He knows what's going on. There's a dragon, there's a intelligence, that's, in the center of the earth that is, living, it's sentient, and it's conscious.
Sure. I watched it a couple of weeks ago, funny enough. In our own civilization, today we've got good and bad, and, we've got good people, we've got bad people, and maybe it's wrong to think of the Anunnaki like that, but when we read what the historical accounts, Enlil is not a nice guy. He's a maniac. He's an absolute maniac. And he
murdered millions, not only of the enemies of the Israelis, but, his own people. Anyone that, worshiped some other god. He killed Jezebel and her whole, lineage for being tolerant and allowing, multiple worship.
It's almost like there's a psychopathic element to this civilization. Not that they all are. I think there's okay people there too. Is it right to think of people? Is it like a model or a microcosm of our own civilization?
Yes, we are they. We are just adapted to with a little clay of Africa, a little copper, and a few of these nice, robust Erectus genes. But we are they, and we have all the tendencies that they have. And what Enki and a company wanted us to do was to move into the spiritual realm, to develop our pineal gland, to be able to empathize with and care about and be compassionate toward all life. And that's what attracted Enki to Homo Erectus in the first place. Homo Erectus was going around letting animals out of his traps. And they said, this is it. These creatures, they made them they're just as smart as we are, but they have something else. They have compassion. And so when you see the so-called bad Anunnaki or the terrible, rulers, the Windsors and the Warbugs and the Lees and the Rockefellers and, Rothschilds and so forth, just instead of alienating them totally, if you just realize that we too have those selfish tendencies, and if we can center ourselves, then we can embrace both the generous, empathetic, and the selfish, take care of yourself part, and we can assess our situation and choose appropriate behaviors instead of being one or the other. So instead of alienating the power elite, I think what we need to do is, pray that we can reach Caesar's or Pharaoh's heart and realize, look, Jimmy Carter came around. He was the Anunnaki. He was, power elite. And what he did was, and now in his spare times, he builds houses for poor people. It's all there. We're all of it.
Sure.
Right. I think we have our Jesuses, we have our Hitlers, and the same can be applied to the the reptilians. There are good and bad in every species. We need to look at people as individuals. Another factor that we've been factoring into this research is apparently there are these interdimensional beings they call the archons that may have taken over, because we see the first generation of the Anunnaki when they came to the planet, they were cooperating, but suddenly the succeeding generations that were here under the influence of the Earth sphere, where probably the archons reside, they started to get a little bit crazy. Inanna acted bizarre, and so did Marduk, and Inanna was the granddaughter of Enlil, and Marduk is the son of Enki. And so we're looking at that maybe they're obsessed or they're taken over. And actually, Ninkashita Thoth said in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, beware of the beings that come into the council and they take over our leaders. And that's the reason he says in the Emerald Tablets, he said he had to sink Atlantis because these interdimensionals were taking over their leaders and they couldn't tell the difference. And he said, beware, we may have conquered them now, but they will return in the future. And then that brings us to David Icke, who says that the reptilians are ruling the queen, and she's a lizard. So, looking at all this, go ahead. You want to talk?
Well, just from my perspective, and I did my postdoc in psychology, Jungian psychology. I studied with Stan Groff and Roger Wilger and so forth. From my perspective, this is a holographic universe, and that everything in the universe is there in some resonant form in each of us, and we are there in every other molecule of the universe right up to the source. And so that if we can accept the parts of ourselves and integrate them, and we can synergize with them, and there doesn't have to be an other. We are all it, and we can empathize with and not drive parts of ourselves into the shadow. When you don't recognize, for example, a selfish part of yourself, it builds and builds and builds until it bursts out, or say an angry part, it bursts out and you go postal, or you kill everybody in McDonald's if you don't take the anger, say, what does this angry part need? Oh, you need attention, you need affection. Well, maybe we can get that in some way before it builds up too much. So I think it's really important not to ascribe everything to something external, but to realize we are they. We're all part of this evolving universe, and the universe evolves higher and higher consciousness, in my opinion.
Well, that gets, and I'll have you ask a question, but that gets to the point that we created this continuum to begin with at the highest level of our existence. See, when I was on board the ship, I was no longer, Janet. I was my eternal self. I was in full recollection of who I was as an eternal being. So we have that part of us that we can access and remember and realize that the game exists because we presented it. We created it. So we decided to consciously come down into this matrix and participate in it. And so, when you watch a movie or a play, who are the greatest actors? They're usually the villains, right? So we need our villains in order to have the polar opposite, in order to identify who we are in relationship to that which we don't perceive ourselves to be. Sure.
I get the impression Enki had his heart in the science. He was a pure scientist, and that Enlil was the baddie. He's the warmonger of the crew.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Anu for the listeners as well, and who Anu was. Anu of Anu, because he actually appeared.
Yes.
He actually appears in Irish mythology as well, and they call it the Paps of Anu, which a lot of people may think they arrived from Israel or Middle East as well.
Well, it's obvious to me that the early settlers of Ireland were refugees from they were Anunnaki, and they came way before the other settlers, and they were there before lots of other people came. And we also know that the Picts were American Indians. They were the same people, the blue-coated, tattooed people. The world was way more connected. Well, to go back to Anu, when Nibiru was losing its atmosphere, and during the reign of Lama, some 400, maybe 500,000 years ago, they needed to do something, and the savants said, well, you can either bomb the volcanoes, whose dust from belching had protected the planet, giving it a shield in its ozone layer, or perhaps you can refine gold to white powder and float it up there, and that'll work. But Lama wouldn't do anything, and he just diddled and didn't do anything. So Prince Alalu led a revolt, and he pushed Lama off the tower, and he said, now I'm king. Well, up stood Anu, who was the prince who was supposed to be next as the successor of Lama, and he said, no way, it's my turn. And Alalu said, no, let me be king, and like I said before, your son and my daughter can marry, and their kid will succeed me. And so Anu said, well, look, I don't want civil war, I'll go for it. Well, so Alalu nuked the volcanoes. That's how they had leftover nukes, because they had a north-south war that almost killed everybody and made a lot more women were left than men, and most of the men were sterile. And so they decided they would have just one king. And so now it was Lama, and he was killed by Alalu. Now Alalu was king, and he made Anu his cupbearer after 7 shars of 3,600 years, or that's rotations around Solaris. Anu challenged Alalu, and they had this naked duel out in the central stair of Agade, their capital, and Anu won. And so Alalu, realizing that he had killed the king before, snuck off and took one of these rocket ships that was loaded with nukes, and he blasted his way with nuclear missiles through the asteroid belt, landed on Earth. On Earth, he aimed the missiles back at Nibiru, and then he communicated with Nibiru, restore my crown, or I'll blast you. And besides that, I have the gold that can save the planet. Well, Anu sent his son, he was now king, sent his son Enki. Look, Alalu is your father-in-law. Go down and see if you can mollify him. And so he was unable to do that. And after a while, Enlil, who was the legal heir of Anu, said, hey, I want to be commander. Send me down there. So all these people were quarreling on Earth. So finally Anu said, I'm going to come down and we'll decide this once and for all. When he came down there, he drew straws between himself, his two sons, Enki and Enlil. Of course, he cheated. And he got the straw to be king and, of Nibiru, and, Enki, got the, charge of mining operations and the seas and transport, and Enlil, who is Anu's legal, successor, got to be commander of the expedition. Well, Alalu saw this going on. He said, hey, you forgot about me. I'm supposed to be king. He said, let's wrestle again. So once again, Anu, who's this great big 12-foot guy, and Alalu, who's slightly bigger, had another wrestling match. And again, Anu pinned Alalu and put his foot on his chest, meaning that I'm king. Well, Alalu jumped off and he bit off Anu's penis. And, wow. And so the king's terribly wounded. He says, okay, I don't want to kill the next king, but, cause that sets a bad precedence. And we've already got enough with Lama being killed. I'm going to sentence you to die on, Mars. So Alalu was to be dropped off on Mars, and, the astronavigator Anzu was, dropped off to, stay there and care for him. And then, King Anu said to, Anzu, look, I'm going to send my daughter, Nimma, and some nurses back, to Earth because, doctors, for my establishment, but I want you to establish a transshipment base on Mars, and we'll have other transshipment bases because it doesn't take as much blast off from Mars. It has a thinner atmosphere. It had water at the time and a thin atmosphere. And so Nimma came back, and Alalu had died, and so Nimma and Anzu made this great big statue at Sindonia of Alalu with his helmet, eagle helmet pushed back so you could see his face, and so forth. Now, Anu continued to run things. He had direct communication with Earth, and things would really get bad. He would come down and he would either message, in the case of the miners' mutiny, which was Enki's excuse for making the slave race. Oh, let's make slaves, then the volunteers from Nibiru won't have to suffer so much. So he came down then, and in 3840 BC, he came down to deal with all these competing factions, and he bedded and made his courtesan Inanna, who was his great granddaughter, and so he would intervene from time to time whenever there was at one point Inanna was chasing Marduk through the Great Pyramid, and she was about to catch him, and he radioed back, listen, don't you catch him. He's got incredible weapons. He's going to kill you. Back off, Inanna. And so she did. So he was continually intervening. And finally, when Enlil, Enki, and Anu got together in 3840 BC, and they looked at how it was that they had been manipulated by this guy who said he was a plenipotentiary of Anu, a guy named Galzu, to preserve humanity, they all concluded, you know what? Higher powers have asked us to make these creatures and to foster them. And I want the Anunnaki to protect and foster and develop these earthlings. So Anu had concluded, and even Enlil wanted to fall in line, because that was the one thing that was biggest for them, that anything, which is do what your father says, because they have this hierarchy and they live by hierarchy. Well, hierarchy is exactly the problem. One-upsmanship, which means that they're always competing, just like our kings murder each other and politicians all do that. Murder your relatives and everybody. Well, he wanted an end to that. We were a pacific and loving creature, and Anu could see that higher powers wanted us to develop because we are based on love. And they again intervene. Enki may well have fathered or even been Jesus, but every time you get somebody who's preaching love and compassion, after they're gone from the scene, their priests use the authority, Weber called it the attempt of regularization of charisma, to kill their enemies and take control.
Wow. Guys, I'm listening here. This is incredible. We're talking, if you look at what goes on our planet today, from political fiascos, international crises, wars, they're all mirrored in these accounts of, historical accounts of the Anunnaki. It's almost like these guys are just like us. They're men acting like children, flexing their muscles, pulling the triggers, pushing the buttons for war. It's really just all mirrored in our own, shenanigans on this planet today.
I concur.
Some things never change.
Yeah, some things never change. Guys, I want you to just take a minute to give out your websites, and if you've got any speaking venues or conferences coming up, I believe you got the Ancient Mysteries Conference in Arizona and the Starworks USA Conference as well, because we're at the top of the first hour.
Okay. So the Ancient Mysteries Conference is November 22nd in Cottonwood, Arizona. I think it's ancientmysteries.com or some variation. Google Ancient Mysteries. Mm-hmm. And we are going to be presenting there. And we will be at the Starworks USA Conference. We have a table, and we're going to be interviewing people as part of Aquarian Radio. It's interesting, you're Capricorn, we're Aquarius.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the 14th through the 16th of November in Laughlin, Laughlan, Nevada, which is about 90 minutes from Las Vegas. So do look us up, and we'd love to talk to you.
Sure. And the website is enkispeaks.com. Is that where everybody can catch the archives for stuff as well?
That's the best place. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, enkispeaks.com is the focus on all the Anunnaki, ancient aliens information. Mm-hmm. And aquarianradio.com is where we archive all these interviews that we do, and we also are the interviewers. Sure. So check that out. And then I have another site called Ninmah, NINMAH.com, which I'm working on putting up. And we need to talk about the goddess at some time here. But okay, I think that's it. Extraterrestrial Contact is another one where I just put UFO information in general, because it's a huge field with lots of subcategories.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. We're talking to Dr. Lessin and Janet Lessin, and we're getting into some of the Anunnaki chronicles of historical accounts, and obviously getting into some of Janet's experiences as well. Nice to tie this in together, guys. And funny enough, I had a question before the show. There is a lot of Anunnaki authors out there, but I don't know of any that has experiences. So maybe with just for you, Janet, because you were talking about other entities, interdimensional or other people other than the Anunnaki, as I should say. Do you look into the Dogon, into that group, and that their knowledge of, quote, the Numu, who people say they're totally different and they were against the Anunnaki?
Well, I haven't done a lot of research into the Dogon, unfortunately, but I have been to, because it's an experiential type thing that, the way the contact is, it's different than my research, right?
Sure.
So when I was, having these experiences, you're having them and you're trying to figure out what is really going on. And sometimes they take me physically. I've had physical markings. Sometimes the contact is, like a, spiritual, astral type connection. So, for example, one time I went to a meeting, which was like a huge United Nations type meeting. There were over 100,000 individual beings. They were conveying to me that is not the limit of the sentient conscious beings that are part of this And they use the word Federation because I have a Star Trek, background. They call it the Federation of Planets, but the universe is so immense, and this contact is universal with all these different beings, and they are living in peace and harmony. And so most of the universe is very peaceful. I have had very intimate relationships with the Greys, with the Anunnaki and tall whites. When I was 10 years old, a mantis came and rescued me from a situation where I felt like I didn't want to live because a boy had molested me. But the mantis came that night and restored my will to live. I had an ongoing encounter with a reptilian being that was trying to literally take my soul out of my crown chakra. It was like a soul sucker. And years later, I got guidance that said, go watch a Harry Potter film. And then I saw Harry Potter, and he's dealing with these, wraiths that are trying to suck his soul out. And I said, yeah, I've been there, got that t-shirt, Harry. So I've dealt with all these different beings, and there are many other types. There was a transparent being, which Stuart Swerdlow also talks about. And so these beings I've dealt with my entire life, and I still, to this day, have ongoing contact. What I do, sometimes I bilocate. I can actually be on another planet or in another dimension or on board a ship, and I'm sitting there, and I'm aware that I'm connected to my body, and the sun is coming up and the birds are singing. We live in the jungles of Maui, and it's very tropical here. It's very beautiful here. And I'm still connected with this this other world. They do a lot of, what do they call those things where they, the name for it, screen memories. They do a lot of screen memories because what happened earlier on, when I became aware I was in another reality, until I learned how to do this. And Whitley Strieber talks about learning how to sit with extraterrestrials, because the human body has the fight or flight potential. And when you become aware that you're not in this reality, you're in front of an extraterrestrial, there's a tendency to jump back into your body or to return to the earth plane and not stay in the experience. So becoming aware of it was first, and this, anybody out there that's an experiencer, you can learn how to relax into the situation, and then you will get more of the experience. And if you catalog it, if you document it, if you write it down, however you do it, YouTube, blog it, whatever you want to do, you'll start realizing the patterns of your contact. And there are far more people on this planet having contact than what we're aware of consciously. Sure. So,
Janet, do you think in a way, I know we talked on the break there about blood groups and blood types and genetics groups, and do you think maybe in that respect there's people that are contacted more so than others because it's perhaps easier, do you think maybe there's other variants of reasons why people are contacted, maybe an experiential reason that they have a life path to laid out for them?
I'll say that, and then Dr. Les wants to say something. Yes, I think a lot of the contactees have a bloodline that they're looking for. They might have capacities that are turned on. Our DNA is on-off switch, so they might be more telepathic. Mm-hmm. I don't think they can communicate telepathically with everybody. I think it has to be a certain either bloodline or maybe the individual is aware. Contactees are often contactees through many lifetimes. So you've got the genetic factor, you have the soul factor, the bloodline factor. And what did you want to say, honey?
Okay, so I have my master's in counseling. Besides that, and I did my postdoc with Stan Groff and Roger Wilger in past life regression and holotropic and entheogen work. And what I find is that to the degree that people have identified with their intellect as their primary social personality or one of their primary social personalities, they tend to shove other aspects, spiritual aspects of them, into the shadows, so they're not aware of them. And I find that when people, as I facilitated probably over 1,000 people, who have done deep work, and that realm is available to everybody. The most difficult thing is to get a person to feel safe enough that they can disidentify with their intellect, let it observe, and then allow other parts of them to come out in whatever fashion they come out, and to keep their eyes closed. Sometimes I use powerful evocative music, and sometimes the person has taken an entheogen, which facilitates the process. And everybody practically can, if they can, and you have to provide an opportunity for them to integrate the instinctual and spiritual and vulnerable parts that come out when you disidentify temporarily with your intellect and social personalities, and center yourself so you can embrace all aspects. If you can embrace all those aspects, then the spiritual aspect and the parts of you that can be contacted with other consciousnesses other than the 3D ones that you're used to becomes available. I think it's available to everybody, but those who have been socialized in cultures that are open to that, it's easier for them to do that disidentification and not be overly connected with your thinking, intellectual, word-making brain.
So you have to be open-minded. It's a case of you'll see it when you believe it in some instances. When I was a young girl, people who were with me tended to see and hear and have the experiences. I don't know if it's maybe I was opening up some interdimensional portals, or, seeing and hearing beyond a normal human spectrum. So, and then, if people are programmed and they're really deep into their dogmatic religions or something, they're not going to see anything, because they're just, they're not going to see it if the ET came and sat on their lap. They're just not going to see it.
For sure. Yeah, funny you say that about the psychic or telepathic abilities. Like we said on the break, the Reese negative people, these genetic pockets that appear in Ireland, Scotland, and Basque people in Spain, a lot of Reese negative people purport to be psychic or have this ability to certain others. Perhaps maybe it's only Reese negative to Reese negative or something like that.
I've always been psychic, but no, I'm not going to do readings. It's just for myself and my family, and it's very personal. But things do come true for me. I've got very strong intuition and guidance, and that I've fostered and nurtured, and it's become very, very strong the older I get.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now,
Janet, it might be the bloodline.
Janet,
I am the Reese negative.
Wow. Fascinating. Janet, before the break you mentioned Ninmeh. Let's talk about Ninmeh and her role in this whole Anunnaki saga.
Oh, well, Ninmeh, I identify with Ninmeh. We've been dealing with a lot of people that identify with the Anunnaki, and we're reluctant to say I'm an incarnation of, so-and-so. But I've met Enkis, I've met, Marduks, I've met Enlils, and I've met, Erishkigal, Inanas. I haven't met another Ninmeh. So am I her incarnation? I don't know. But I strongly identify with her energy. And I'm really not comfortable with the word channeling. If I sit down and start writing a Ninmeh, it's not that I disappear. It's like the words, the thoughts, the ideas, the impressions, they come through. Now, Ninmeh was the mother of humanity, and she loved humanity. She loved her human beings. She loved her Lulus. And when the flood happened, she promised, it wasn't God, a man, who got credit for it. She promised that she would come back and save us and not allow this to ever happen again. So I've been in communication with her, and, she's given me some insight into how she's going to do that. But just to go back to the historical aspects of Ninmeh, she was not only the birth mother who bore the first human being in her womb, who gave birth to it, who actually suckled it at her breast. She raised these children, and she loved them. She was a geneticist. She was a brilliant geneticist, and she is the one that came up with the idea of how to make it happen. She said, let us mix the admixture in a vessel of clay, because it wasn't working when they used the other elements, the containers. So they had to use a vessel of clay, and that's the one that took, and that's the one that was intelligent and was able to speak. And it wouldn't work if you put the combination of the egg and sperm and all that into another Earth mother. It had to be in the womb of an Anunnaki, and so they were going to use, Enki said, no, use my, it was kind of bad, use Damkina, use my wife, that was that arranged marriage. And she says, no, this is my experiment. I will not risk let anyone else take this risk. We don't know what it's going to do. I will bear the child. And so she did. So we are here because of Nimma. And we owe her a debt of gratitude, and we need to bring her back because that's what's wrong with this planet. The major thing that's wrong with this planet is we are out of balance in the masculine and feminine.
Agreed.
If we went into a partnership society where we respected women and we have equal pay and we stop doing clitorectomies, we stop having burqas. I don't know how in a society we're going to do this, but this is what needs to happen, is that every single person gets respect, but especially every single female person needs to be treated equally to men. And once that stops, probably the veil will come down. My book is called The Veil, Pierce the Veil, and we will wake up, become a conscious, civilized civilization that respects every individual and allows us to live with dignity, beauty, grace, and in peace.
Wow, beautiful. I guess this one's for you, Dr. Lessin. Tell us about the Elohim and the Nephilim and where they fit into this. Are these other names for the Anunnaki directly, or?
Yeah, they're hybrids. There were several times when Enki at one of the passes of Nibiru, things got really bad on Nibiru itself, and about 200,000 years ago, the gold shield was washed away again, and so Enlil started pressuring. We need more gold. We need more gold. Blah blah blah. And so Enki decided that he would make the humans even more intelligent. So he found two of these pretty Adamite girls, and he impregnated them, and they had the children Adapa and Titi, and these were incredibly brilliant children, and they Damkina and Nimma and Enki raised them. They were polyamorous, and they were all together, and they gave these children incredible education. And it was soon apparent to everybody that Adapa was the smartest thing around. Anu had him brought to Nibiru. This is the Bible takes this up and calls it Enoch, but it was Adapa. And then Enki kept making kids with the prettiest girls in each generation. Not only Enki, but all the Anunnaki did. And his greatest accomplishment, his overseer was a guy named Lumach. And Lumach had a beautiful wife named Batanash. And so the workers, as Enlil gave more and more demands for more work and don't use so much food up, started hating Lumach, who had to enforce these. And so Enki said, well, look, Lumach, I'm going to protect you. I'll send you down to Marduk. He'll teach you some more stuff. And for her own good, I'll send Batanash over to Nimma's place in Sharupak. And as soon as that happened, he zipped over there and he made love with Batanash, and their kid, Ziasutra, who we know as Noah, was Enki's child. And that was one of his big motives for him going into alliance with Ziasutra and giving Ziasutra the computer program of how to make the submersible. When Enlil saw that the humans, the illegal species, that's us, wasn't wiped out, and he saw that on top of Mount Ararat, there was, wait a minute, Jan's giving me something in the middle.
The 200 men from Mars, that's the Elohim. Yeah. Tell about that. Finish your flood story.
Oh, Janet. Okay, excuse me.
Sure.
So anyway, Enlil was infuriated. You saved your son, Ninagal, drove this submersible, and you let Noah, the king of Sharupak, survive with his community. I'm going to kill you. He said, no, wait, you got to understand. I didn't tell anybody, but Noah, Ziasutra is my son. And by this time, Ninurta, Enlil's son, came down, and Nimma came down and said, look, Dad, we're going to need to rebuild here. Why don't we rule through Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and we'll just have temples and let these people rule and take the flak for us. So that was a further enhancement, and that is the origin of the current planetary oligarchy from Noah and his sons.
So what about the 200 men that the rape of the Sabine women?
Oh, okay, yeah, that was another big incursion. Marduk realized that he needed humans, earthlings, us, to help him, and so he deliberately married one of these half-breed women, Sarpanit, and Anu said, "Great, you can marry an earthling, but you can never come back to Nibiru." Because he was afraid that Marduk would educate us and we would take over what Marduk thought was his right to be king of Nibiru. But he plotted with Shamgaz, who was the head of the astronaut corps. And so after his wedding, Sarpanit and Marduk left for Egypt, and Shamgaz and the astronauts who had come down seized a whole bunch of these Adapite women, the descendants of Adapa, 200 of them, and took them back to the landing place at Baalbek and said, "Hey, we've got control of everything. You either recognize our marriages as legal, or we're gonna, or you're through. We're gonna bomb you out of existence. We control things here now." And so Enlil let it go. And during the flood, which came later, Anu said, "You've got to warn these people, these half-breeds. They live mainly near Jericho, the Forbidden Zone. You've got to let them go to higher ground." So they survived with their families too. The Philistines were their descendants.
Does this tie in with the Igigi?
Yeah, that is the Igigi. The astronaut corps was the.
But that's the Igigi people.
They ran the transshipment base at Mars. They had the station that was stationed up above Badi Batira, the smelting place in Iraq. They ran all the shuttlecrafts. That's the Igigi. And then later on, they sided with Marduk, because Marduk had, for a while, had been, after Anzu had been overthrown, Marduk was in charge of them. So they were allies. And so that Shamgaz was in on the murder of Osiris. He plotted with Marduk's other son, Seth, to kill Osiris. And so that's the other line.
You know what grabs me, guys? We're talking here, having a great discussion, and we're getting into the nitty-gritty. However, you just couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, you literally couldn't sit down. If you asked a science fiction writer to sit down and write this stuff, you couldn't make it up, like, you know. However, we have historians sitting there, you know, just relegating this all to the realms of mythology because they don't understand it or they don't accept it. I think it's more a lack of acceptance.
Yeah, you know, it's like this in the whole field of anthropology. Things that have been written off as myths, you know, so here we have these civilizations that have kilns, that have metallurgy, that have asphalt, that have sailing ships, that have compasses and stuff like that. And they say, well, you know, these people, just have these silly myths about gods giving them those things. Well, they're not myths at all. A flying, chariot is an airplane. The submarine that swallows Noah is a submarine. We have pictures of Enki wearing a frog suit with, wearing, air tanks on his back. You know, it's like, we just, were, the 19th century historians did the best they could with what they had, and our ancestors used the metaphors and descriptions that were in the cultures that they had, and they were written off as myths, but they ain't myths. They are people's. Our ancestors are just as smart as we are, and they were, and they lived longer too. Well, so they had more. And so what they are saying is just using their words for. To describe things. But
it's worse than that. The three major religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, were probably created by Enlil to keep us divided and conquered. We have, George Orwell's 1984 talks about the three different countries, but it's actually the three major religions. There are other religions, but every time you have a religion introduced, it divides us and separates us and keeps us in some kind of eternal war with each other. And there's only one species here. We can all mix with each other. You know, look at it in terms of what is a race and what is a species. we can breed even with the Anunnaki. We're able to mate with an Anunnaki, so we're all one species here.
Sure.
But the artificial separations of race, religion, color, creed, countries, patriotism, all that stuff is meant to keep us warring from each other, so we never figure out what's really going on. And I think that's what this is all
about. And they introduced religions like Mormonism. Moroni was a holographic projection. Joseph Smith said, "Why do you keep saying the same thing again, identically? Well, it's because it was a hologram that we were generating another religion. And Mormonism really took the United States by storm for a while before Joseph Smith was assassinated.
Sure. You know, in terms of war, slavery, religion, and how they're all interconnected with each other, whether that's debt slavery or whether that's slavery from third world countries to second world countries, independency, or whatever type of slavery you want to talk. However, it's all interconnected. And, you know, when you tell people today about war, slavery, religion, a lot of people just switch off and they don't want to know. And maybe it's perhaps that there's something in the human race today that they're less awake, they're less aware, they're switched off to kind of human concepts. And when you tell them about any of this Anunnaki stuff, they just don't want to know. And for me, it's like one of the biggest things I don't preach this to people. And if they come my way, I'll tell them and I'll educate them and I'll say, no, this is this, A, B, C, this is the data, this is what we have, this is what we know, this is what we're not sure about. You know, I think it's an incredibly important story to know. I guess, is that what drives you guys today? Is that why you want people to understand this stuff? It's a necessity or a significance to know?
Absolutely. I have had my visions when I was a small child of Israelis and Egyptians taking their weapons of mass destruction, making a great big hole, and then driving the tanks in there, and then throwing dirt on top of it. And then the Egyptians showed the Israelis their folk dances, and we did the hora, the Israeli dance on top of it, and we all loved each other in peace. And this is my vision that I got from not an Anunnaki, but from a real mensch, a real human being named Irving Lessin, and that's the vision that has carried me to this day.
And I think the reason why they go blind is the religious and cultural conditioning programming that they come into. It's called the God spell, or it's the Ray told us it was the
God virus.
The God virus. We come in and we get indoctrinated into religion or a belief system based on where we're born, and we also have the antivirus against any other concept that is outside of that which supports the religion upon which we were born. So you have very few people that, some people do rebel against the religion and they go like in a polar opposite direction. We have a lot of mind control programming out there. We've got a whole grid now of cell phones. We had television and radio, and now we've got cell phones. So there's a lot of mind control and programming. And then we have implants. People are getting vaccinations and they're getting, RFID chips in there, and we're not sure of the mechanism. This was the problem that Stuart Swerdlow and his group at the Montauk Project, they had to overcome the mind control programming. They had all been implanted. But consciousness is. So we have the source, the creator of all, oneness that sent us down into physicality. So the whole time we're in here in physical form, there's a part of us that is working to wake up and become conscious and ultimately reconnect with source. But you don't have to die. You can have heaven on earth and you can wake up, become conscious. But the problem is when you're conscious and awake and everybody else is asleep, you're going, oh, now what do I do? I'm the only one awake. But it's kind of like lighting a candle. You'll wake up. We're reaching critical mass, and soon, like in the fairy tale Sleeping Beauty,
sure.
Enough of us are going to wake up that this whole morphogenic field shifts and the veil comes down and we all start wiping the sleep from our eyes and realizing that we were, in a dream.
Yeah. In that respect, I always like to teach a philosophy of faith and belief, that there's a stark difference. Once you discern the difference between faith and belief, faith is okay, but once you believe in something, that can be either good or bad, but people don't kill for faith. People kill for beliefs. And I'm particularly talking to religious ideals here. And there's nothing wrong with religion if you don't harm anybody. However, many wars, religious wars, have waged on this planet. And in that respect, you know, once you believe in something, you're so dogmatic, you're so held on to that. You know, but what's wrong with faith? You know, there's a big difference between faith and belief. And it's something that, you know, it's only through education and awareness you realize. You know, guys.
It's be live. So what do you want to live? Do you really want to live that? Want to live that? So, that's why I don't identify with any organized religion, because, you know, most of them have people marching off to war. So I am so against war. War is the enemy of humankind. And so I'm very spiritual though. So.
Sure. Do you think then, I know you've had your own experiences, Janet, that, and this is kind of, well, that was answered when we said if Nibiru is not near us at the moment, or maybe it is, but people say there's Anunnaki on the planet as we speak. Well,
oh yes, there is.
Yeah, there are.
Are we talking actual Anunnaki, or are we talking descendants of Anunnaki?
Both.
Yeah, we're talking about. We have a researcher that his name is Glenn Bogue, and I really identify with his research. And he says that Enki and Nima have been with us all along, and you know, they come in and they experience lifetimes. They pretend to age. Just like many science fiction episodes have had the immortal being that comes through, pretends to age, and they move on. Especially in ancient times, you know, they weren't tracking birth and deaths like we do now. So, he thinks that, and we'll have to have him on one of our shows, something, where you can talk to him. But he has this whole idea of, Enki is, Jesus. And I agree with him. For a while there, I was thinking that, Jesus was the son of Enki. But, he said, no, this was all, and what his logic is that Enki and Nima finally got married. See, they were forbidden to marry. Remember, Anu, wouldn't let, her marry Enki because, she had this child by Enlil, Ninurta, and so she was forbidden to ever marry. So finally, the wedding at Cana, the Jesus and Mary, that is actually Enki and Nima. And Nima is, Mary, and she comes down and she, not Mother Mary, but Mary Magdalene, and Mary was the image at Fatima and all these other visitations of the Mary. If you just want to Google the Mary, visions, that's, Nima. So Nima's coming here, and she's still, like she said, I'm not abandoning my children, I'm protecting them, I'm here, I'm not gonna let this flood happen again. And Enki is, probably over there in the UK, and he's doing the crop circles. In fact, one of the crop circles said, he finally answered, someone asked, who is the author of these crop circles? And it came back that this is Enki. So wow. I think they're still here.
Another way to look at it is they're in each of us. Mm-hmm. That, if you look at the holographic idea of the universe, that energy is one of our potential subselves, and we can let that, develop that and bring it into our conscious center. And that's what Janet has done.
Sure. I hope to have Nassim on the show, Nassim Haramein. He's talking about the holographic universe and the crop circles too, for that matter. But yeah, an important point that this holographic nature of the universe, and that kind of lends me to some of the science and technology of the Anunnaki that, you know, if it was purely about slavery, perhaps it was at the start, but, you know, I don't think they would have taught us so much, scientific concepts, or maybe they just left scientific concepts here. Do you think there was originally just a basic?
There was a deliberate, Enlil wanted just stupid slaves that would work. Enki, Nima, and Ningishita wanted to create a superior being that was better than them, wow. That was free of their lust for slavery, one-upsmanship, and lack of compassion. It was we were deliberately created to do better than our creators.
Pioneers, in a way. These guys are pioneers.
Mm-hmm. They noticed that the indigenous creatures were letting out these other creatures, animals that they had captured. They were going and setting the other animals free, and that's why they chose the precursors to the humans.
Yeah, Bigfoot, hominoid, is still here and is an intelligent being that's in the places that us people with, they're built differently. Their hands come down, by their knees. Their feet are completely flat. There's not one bone in Bigfoot or, Homo neanderthalensis it's just not like us at all. They're just another smart species that's avoiding us, basically. But they're here on Earth.
Isn't there something about the human nature that wants to be spiritually evolved? On the good side, I know there's bad aspects to our human nature too. But,
absolutely. That drive of every creature and every being and every molecule is for evolution to higher and higher unity, till we get back to source and realize we are all one.
We're all one. And to have no suffering and to be evolved in a spiritual sense. There's something in the human nature to strive to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were heading that way with the baby boomers. We really were heading that way, and somehow like I said, when I was 4 and taken on the mothership, somehow our reality had been hijacked. I have a lot of, former friends that were former like hippies, and they go, this is not the future that we were heading to. And that brings us back to the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia experiment, that every 20 years, it was August 12th, 1943. Then we have 63. That's when the biorhythms of the planet are all in alignment, and the powers that be, whoever they are probably in Montauk. I don't know where they are really now, but they do these experiments and they hijack the timeline back. So we're not where we were originally. Our reality keeps getting hijacked. But as souls, as spirits, we are the chooser. That's what they told me on the ship. They said, you can choose which timeline, which reality you want to be in. And it's not like you can just automatically jump from timeline 1 to 20. It's like a lanes on the highway. So you have to go down and gradually shift over. But you as the chooser and the co-creator with source and the creator of all of this paradigm, this matrix, this reality, you can choose to shift over to one of the positive utopian timelines, and probably the ones where everybody's killing each other will still exist, but you personally can get yourself on a better trajectory instead of this whatever this is that's going on now with planet Earth. That's why I don't watch the news, I don't listen to it. I go, very nice, thank you very much, and next, and I switch the channel. Sure. I don't want to program myself with that stuff.
And to kind of come back to the elitist agenda, if you will, right back from the very early records we have of Anunnaki, we have taxation, the invention of agriculture, we have taxation, control, manipulation, financing, the inception of the monetary system. It still goes on today. Everything, the banking collapse, all orchestrated. And I think a lot of people have woke up in a modern sense because of, financial collapses, really, which may seem a bit strange, however, but, people watch their pennies and people are very aware when you mention money. Do you ever see us freeing from that, money control system?
Definitely. It was a deliberate introduction by Nanar, alias Allah, who ran things from Ur after they decided this was a more efficient way. Let's get everybody in debt. Let's get the same thing Alexander Hamilton did with the United States. Oh, let's get the United States in debt so we can be part of the game with everybody else. So this was a deliberate introduction by the Anunnaki to use debt as a form of slavery. And so the financial crisis is a big wake-up call. Just like for my generation, we had our wake-up call. A hero named Mario Savio jumped on top of a car at Berkeley, California and said, no, we won't support this war in Vietnam. We won't support any other war. We love all human beings. We won't war anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In a sense then, there's a lot of people say that we got like bloodlines in full control of the planet. Do you think that the bloodlines that are probably left are warring factions among themselves? Do they even know the truth about their own lineage, or are they a little misguided?
They absolutely know. Max Weber a long time ago said it's impossible to have a unitary bureaucracy without policy competition within it. So even when you have an ultimate dictator, you have factions, and it's impossible for them to be ever totally unified.
I personally believe that that certain bloodlines through financial institutions all fund universities to feed the evolutionary biologists with exactly the right funding that they need to promote this idea. I really do believe it's all to promote. And, Charles Darwin, he didn't even half believe, or he wasn't comfortable, I should say, with his own evolution book on evolution. And in that sense, do you think people are just so far gone down the wrong road that they're never going to wake up? Do we need people to wake up? Is it going to get to, like you say, critical mass?
Oh, I think it will. The indications are that we are waking up, and that in itself, when you keep reinforcing that statement that people aren't waking up, then you'll bring more people that aren't awake in your life. It's all about personal responsibility and where are your thoughts or deeds, and we create our reality. So I surround myself with people that are like yourself, more awake, more conscious, and the more that you create this grid, it's kind of like that ripple effect of the stone in the waters, that it keeps growing and growing. And
sure.
Anyway, so that's
what I find, James, is that we are doing part of the job ourselves. That is, when the intellect receives certain kinds of information, it can't ignore it because our intellects have preserved us thus far. Yeah. And so if you give a person enough information, they're either forced to totally reject it by this antivirus thing, or if it's loaded on enough, they are bound to allow their whole cognitive framework to reorganize to accommodate the new information that they've taken in. So all we got to do is get a hearing, and this is what we're doing right at this moment.
Right, we're working here in the United States to get the Disclosure Project onto Capitol Hill. Stephen Bassett has created over 7,000 DVDs of the, 3 or 4 days or 5 days that was recorded last year in the citizens' hearing on disclosure in Washington, D.C. And they are about to, we're waiting for Election Day is tomorrow. And I think the day after that, they are sending these DVDs to Capitol Hill, to all the lobbies, to all the everybody here, and there's going to be a percentage of them that open these and wake up and start becoming aware that they've been lied to, that the government's lying to them, and that the extraterrestrials walk among us, and that we've had this for over 60 years.
Yeah, the idea is to get these people to hold a congressional hearing again, and it'll put pressure on the higher powers like the president. Well, look, is Congress going to bring this stuff out? Maybe I should do it first. And Pope is saying, well, maybe I should announce that the ETs are here first, and there'll be a rush to, or Hillary will. Sure. There'll be a rush to see who can take credit for the ETs, and however, I think that disclosure already is taking place right here, right now. The millions and millions of people who have experienced contact couldn't be making all this stuff up. It's just so overwhelming that there is an extraterrestrial presence, and it's mainly beneficent, but not entirely so.
Right there in the UK, they have a fellow named Simon Parkes who says he is Illuminati, and he's had lifelong experiences, and he's an elected official. So I recommend you Google Simon Parkes and listen to his. We have testimonials. We have more and more people that are experiencers that are coming on to radio shows and telling their tale. And so I encourage you to record them. And this is a way of disclosure. Sure. It's overwhelming, millions. I wanted to say one thing about the finance. Alex Collier says that extraterrestrials don't use money, and he was actually invited to do a presentation for the Andromedans, and he actually did like a PowerPoint presentation. He went up there and they said, well, that's very, after the presentation, they said, well, that's very interesting. However, we don't get it. None of the extraterrestrials use money. We need to understand their social systems, and I think that's coming. We think that we have to run our society based on the formats that exist here and now that we know of. But there are other ways to run whole societies in which, where every single person gets to have their needs met.
Ubuntu.
Ubuntu is probably telling there's a Ubuntu movement. But Collier said is, how is it that you have a planet where people are born and then you tax them? You make them pay? They didn't ask to be born. We need to provide for every citizen of our planet, for their basic needs of food, water, shelter, education. So we have to rethink this all, and we're starting to come up with solutions. What would happen if there was disclosure? What would be like the day after disclosure?
There'd be free energy for one thing.
Yeah, the energy systems would shift, money would go.
Yeah, just on the elitist agenda, I think a lot of people have trouble trying to believe that there's a present group of bloodlines on this planet controlling everything, going right back to the time of the Anunnaki 5,000 years ago. And when you state it like that, yeah, that may sound very, very simple and incredible. However, if you look at the evidence and keep an open mind, it's all there for you to read. It's all there for you, it's all documented, and if you listen to what you're told to believe, which is what a lot of history is, like it's one person's viewpoint. If you look at the actual data with an open mind and a perspective that's yours, not somebody else's, I just tell people it's all there to read about. You just have to keep yourself grounded in a way.
One thing that I would like to mention is that the way the Illuminati, power elite, planetary oligarchy, whatever you want to call them, stay in power, is by making all these competing nations and places of such great instability that they can basically run the poppy trade, the heroin poppy trade, and keep the poor people addicted to heroin and finance their wars and their assassinations by the profits from this. And they've been exposed a number of times. That's how they that's what the war in Afghanistan was all about. That's what a lot of the war in Vietnam was all about. It's all about supporting the drug trade of the Illuminati. They addict people to heroin, and they make money on this stuff.
Sure. I think you're right. I think, like I said, the financial collapse woke a lot of people up, but also the perpetual war game that's played out on this planet. This perpetual state of war that the planet's in. Many wars are raging on the planet. It's all orchestrated, and it's all done for gun running and addictions and drug nations to, keep people addicted, to keep the supply and demand there and to keep control in place. Guys, we're at the top of the second hour. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you guys. Dr. Lessin, hope you come back again sometime. Janet Lessin, I hope you come back too. And I look forward to the new book that's coming out. Give us out your websites one more time before we wrap things up.
EnkiSpeaks.com, AquarianRadio.com, Ninma.com, and ExtraterrestrialContact.com.
Oh, wonderful. Listen, guys, fascinating talking to you guys. Keep up the good work. You really do a great service for this subject matter. You really, really do. And it's great to see.
I'd like to have you do a thing on the megaliths of Ireland sometime on our show.
Oh, yes, for sure. If that's an open invite, I'll gladly take it. I love talking. I'm passionate about the megaliths. I really, really am. And, I think I have something different on it. I look at the astronomy and I look at the acoustics, and don't normally mention it on the show, but a lot of people know that anyway. But fascinating subject matter too. And I think there is a lineage going back to the supernatural race of gods, the Tuatha de Danann. So for sure, let's do it, guys.
Let's do that. All right. Well, we look forward to it. So thank you once again for having us on the show, and much love and blessings and aloha from Janet and Sasha.
Aloha.
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 There, and nothing ever evolved to another genus. Yeah, there's ratiation and microevolution is indeed true, but macroevolution isn't. And as far as the great movements of civilization, we find that indeed, when the Anunnaki, after the Great Flood, decided they were going to make us more self-governing, they were here in order to get gold, and we were created to mine gold for them. And they deliberately introduced metallurgy and kilns and those kinds of and their form of government and debt, and deliberately made us pitted against each other, so we could never realize there's only about 1,000 of them and there was hundreds of thousands of us. And they had detailed records of how they took people across both the Pacific and Atlantic. They had a huge spaceport by Tiwanaku on top of the Andes, by Lake Titicaca, and they were all over the globe. They had a global network with landing fields, and their structures. They had pyramids, which were their powerhouses, and they had orientations with the stones, like Stonehenge and other similar structures, Göbekli Tepe and others, which basically let them know calendars and computers where they could actually see how we aligned as the precession of equinoxes shifted Earth about, so that they could always navigate back and forth. And on this globe, they had spacecraft, they had shuttles, they had a geocentric system, and they had a base on Mars. And basically, all the old anthropology and people that were stuck in academia were, you lose your job if you say, well, my mentor, who's made his career on evolution, is wrong. Fortunately, I guess my mentors aren't around anymore, the older guys. But in any case, I started studying with Zecharia Sitchin, and looking at all these old Sumerian materials. And
2005 in Florida, Fort Lauderdale, I think it was, and he sat on the edge of the bed and he prayed. And he said, "I prayed to Enki." And I said, "If you help me get through this surgery, I will do another book for you." So after that, when we had seen him before that, the open heart surgery, but afterwards, his heart was literally open. There was a huge change in him. He was more egocentric before the surgery, and he was heart-centered afterwards. And somebody asked him a question and noticed it, and he says, "Yes, think about it. I was cut open like a fish. I was filleted wide open right down the center, and my heart chakra is now fully opened." So I think he really enjoyed, the last parts of his life.
Wow.
And it was very sad how he died, because we didn't even know he was dead for about 2 weeks.
Wow.
And they had him in a home somewhere. There's a whole story behind that.
But his biggest, what he wanted, for his legacy was to finance the, examination of, Puabi, the last, part Anunnaki ruler who was, buried, and in Uruk. And, that's, I think, is going to go through. And this we'll see. This princess, she's underneath, her corpse is in the British Museum underneath. That will actually show us just what the difference between the Anunnaki genome and ours is.
Wow.
Right. Some kind of controversy had put aside a couple of $1 million or whatever so that this project could go forward, because he wanted to prove that she was Anunnaki ancestry. So
sure.
That is, I think, in progress now. I don't really know.
Sure. Yeah, I go to the British Museum at least once a month, if not twice a month. I'm flying to London regularly, and the people have no idea that they have at least 3 times the quantity in the underground basements and in the warehouses than what's above ground. And John, let's get into a little bit about your background, and just to do it justice. Can we talk about your experiences with contact and how far back it goes, Janet?
Well, basically, I came into the physical form, and
the evidence is overwhelming, not only of the Anunnaki, but of other, that we've been visited by extraterrestrials from time immemorial, and way before the Anunnaki came, which was only 450,000 years ago.
Wow. Wow, Dr. Lessin, awesome. You're so passionate when you speak. I actually just twigged a memory there. I think the first book I ever read in alternative history, if you want to call it that, was Gods of the New Millennium by Alan Alford, and in it he cited a lot of Sitchin's work. I think he heavily cited Sitchin, and at that point I realized I just had to go and read Sitchin's work, because there seemed to be too many references, and why not go to the source? And when I read the Earth Chronicles, I was like gobsmacked. I was like, wow, why don't we get this in the history books? Why don't we get this in school? And, how was it for Sitchin in his day when he was, he was a veteran of this subject matter. He really spent his life and devoted it. A lot of man hours. What was it like for him to try and just keep sludging away and getting this information out there and keep researching and writing?
Well, he after a while became annoyed with doubters and people that would attack him, and he reached the point where he said, "I'm not going to appear on the stage with anybody else. I don't want to be in a big argument. I want to present my evidence." And he presented it in huge detail. And we went to all these seminars where we actually we take things apart sentence by sentence by sentence. He was infinitely patient. And, his very last book, he had a heart attack before he did it. he prayed that he could live long enough to finish his last book. And in that last book, The King Who Wouldn't Die, he actually goes into some of the explicit sexual practices of Inanna and Gilgamesh and things that he'd been holding back. And he just let it all hang out in that last book.
Wow. I think he realized the importance of it. He lived to a ripe age as well, Dr. Lessin.
He was 90 years old, and it wasn't a heart attack. He had open heart surgery. And I think he got 2 more books out after that, but he sat on the edge of his bed. He told us this at the conference in 2000.
Publicizing yourself as a full-time job as an author, and I see a lot of authors out there, they just publish the book and they leave it go and they hope for the best. But you guys, you have a good dynamic, and I see a lot of effort go in. I know this from myself, and fascinating subject as well, guys. We're going to get into that. I guess, Dr. Lessin, if you could tell us a little bit about you, the anthropologists, the education background, that respect, and then how you fell in with Sitchin as well.
Okay, I'm from UCLA, and I have a PhD in anthropology from UCLA. And at the time I was going to UCLA, the anthropologists were forcing everything into an evolutionary perspective, and so that all of the sudden achievements of Sumerian civilization and so forth, the professors were constrained to make it sound as though they evolved. And the same too with physically. They were using this model that we had to come from a simple primate and evolved. And of course that model has, American Indians were supposedly came across the Bering Strait when the sea wasn't so high, and that they finally worked their way all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in South America. And it was just a bunch of nonsense, because the evidence that we now have is that Earth was seeded by terraformers, that we did not evolve from simpler creatures at all, but that we were deliberately engineered from the genome of full intellectual human beings, the Homo sapiens from the planet Nibiru, and they dictated records to the adapted species, the slave species, that's us, about how they came here and how they used some genes from Homo erectus, which was one of these intelligent hominoids that had been placed here. That's the ancestor of modern Bigfoot that's still around. And when we started looking at all the supposed species that evolved in the Cretaceous and so forth, we found that no, they were all
the Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm excited to be speaking to 2 guests today. I think it's the first time I've had a husband and wife team on the show. However, I must say each person is individually specifically interesting in their own merit, and we're going to talk about each other's independent work. And we're also going to talk about books that they have co-authored, talking about the Anunnaki today. We've touched on this a few times on the show. Super interesting. Let me just tell you about Dr. Sasha Lessin before I bring him on. Dr. Sasha Lessin, PhD, author of The Anunnaki, Gods No More, and producer of the highly popular website EnkiSpeaks.com. He studied with the late Zachariah Sitchin for many years, and Sitchin asked Dr. Lessin to create popular courses to revise ancient anthropology and add the aliens and the Anunnaki on Earth from 450,000 BC to 300 BCE. To appreciate ethnology, Lessin's speciality in anthropology, he invites you to empathetically review stories of our ancestors recorded and recited of extraterrestrial gods. Let me tell you a little bit about Janet Lessin. Janet Kira Lessin is a lifelong scholar and experiencer of extraterrestrial and interdimensional contacts. She's a student of Sitchin also. She immersed herself in studies of Ninmah, the Anunnaki, and received direct downloads from Ninmah, the geneticist from whose womb we all received our mitochondrial DNA. Janet expresses Ninmah consciousness, peace, longevity, respect for consciousness, justice for women on Earth, and membership in galactic society. She's also co-authored Anunnaki, Legacy of the Gods with her husband, Dr. Sasha Lessin. Wow, and if that wasn't an entrance enough, we also have they have a radio show, Aquarian Radio. So without further ado, welcome to Capricorn Radio, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us on your show. We're very blessed that you've invited us to be here today.
Wow, it's, I love what you guys do. You put so much time into your websites, your radio shows, your books, and, public